All right, we're finished with Jacob's scheme. Turns out to be genetically correct. And so now let's go to point 8. Are bats incorrectly referred to in the Bible? And that's another point of contention, and they just want to pass it off on us, Christians, to investigate whether this is the case. It takes one sentence to make an objection, and it takes many pages to prove it right or wrong. So, the objector's viewpoint is, you maintain that the Bible is inerrant, but I can point out some errors. The Bible mentions that the taxonomic classification of chiropterians, wow, and it is wrong in the way that it does. These references do show some evidence of errors within the work. I guess that refers to bats. So Greg Hartman's answer, there are 3 references to bats in the Bible. Leviticus 11:19, Deuteronomy 14:18, and Isaiah 2:20. The latter reference mentions bats by themselves, so it is probably not the mistake you have in mind. He's answering this guy's question. The first 2, however, mentions bats in lists with birds. I'll take a wild stab here and guess you're calling it a mistake to list bats with birds. Fair enough. I can offer 2 answers to that, the first of which is not satisfactory, but the second of which is. There's a stabbing in the dark, and you use a couple of technical terms, and then a Christian has become a biologist, the next as a nuclear physicist. So it takes like a lot of research. In Deuteronomy, the Hebrew word rendered opha is used to define the list of vertebrates. The King James Version refers to it as fowls. This word means literally to cover with wings, or winged creature. I could argue that such a word could encompass bats as well as birds, but this is not a satisfactory argument for 2 reasons. It still makes the error you're talking about by classifying bats with birds, and Deuteronomy 14:18's unharmonic reference, Leviticus 11:19, uses the Hebrew word tispon, which means bird in no uncertain terms. Thus we must conclude in harmonizing the 2 references that the specific term bird, tispon, in Leviticus, by the law of harmonics and the law of first mention, instructs us to interpret the generic term winged creature, oph, in Deuteronomy as bird, and it is so rendered in the NIV and most other translations. A lot of times people find fault with the Bible because the King James writers back in the 16th century misinterpreted. Well, it's not the problem with the Bible, it's the problem with the translators. Therefore, we are left with the uncertainty that both lists should be classified as lists of birds and not just lists of generic winged creatures. This leads us to the second answer, which evidently is going to be satisfactory. Since we know we are definitely talking about a list of birds, how can we account for the presence of the bat here? The word rendered bat in the Hebrew, atallêph. This word, like several others in the same list, is of uncertain origin. And don't take my word for it, look at the footnotes of the NIV for Leviticus 11:20, which ends the list. And it will tell you that the precise identity of several animals in the list are uncertain. So the translators, not knowing, they make up what they can do. Well, that's not the problem with the original text. The Hebrew lexicon's definition for atallêph says the same thing, of uncertain derivation. What I'm saying is this: we simply do not know exactly what vertebrate is being described here, or in several other instances in the same passage. In other words, the jury's still out, and you have no solid idea whether or not this is actually a mistake. And you won't unless the word can be precisely defined. To digress a second, the King James Version mentions the unicorn in several places. Some skeptics still try to gloat. Everyone knows there's no such thing. Well, the word unicorn in the Hebrew word ram, in 1611, the translators working on the King James Version simply did not know what animal it's referred to. So they did the same thing the translators of the NIV did with atallêph. They guessed. Well, that's not the problem with the original text. The problem was that they not only guessed the wrong animal, they picked an animal that didn't even exist. Though, of course, they thought unicorns existed then. At that time, they thought it did. Well, that's the problem. That's why you check different versions. In the intervening years, Bible scholars have learned that ram refers to the aurochs, which is a now extinct species of wild ox. Well, it's a long way from that. Look up all the King James Version references to the unicorn in the NIV and you'll see, surprise, ram rendered as wild ox. The aurochs was already extinct in 1611, and its prior existence was not known at that time, given that the science of paleontology did not really exist yet. This forced the translators to guess, and there's a technical term for guesses like this, which, by the way, are few and far between, but it escapes me at the moment. But I'd rather call a spade anyway. But the aurochs was still alive in Bible times. Julius Caesar saw it and wrote about it. He described it as immense in size, of great strength, speed, and ferocity, and that it was untamable. It became extinct in Europe in the Middle Ages, somewhat earlier in Syria-Palestine, and its name transferred to the common ox, which still exists. The Arab cognate is rim, which is similar. This is a great example of an assertion I've made all along, that the Bible and science have nothing to fear from one another. In this case, philology, the Akkadian cognate rimu, describes the aurochs, and paleontology. Tristram independently corroborated its existence in the Lebanon mountains, helped solve the problem, a translation problem. It's a translation problem, not a text problem. I said all that is to say this. It is entirely possible that the Hebrew word atallêph refers to a species of bird we simply don't know about. You know as well as I do that our taxonomic catalog is far from complete, and which may be extinct to boot. The bottom line is this. Over 200 Hebrew scholars worked on the NIV, but they collectively felt unsure enough about the translation of atallêph to put in a footnote explaining that they simply aren't sure what the word means. That being the case, I'll say this. If 200 Hebrew scholars weren't sure what the word meant, it is premature to announce with any degree of certainty that you do. This guy is an objector. Because until and unless the word is solidly defined, you'll either have to admit you don't have a leg to stand on, or you'll have to pretend you are the only person in the world who knows the precise definition of atallêph. To sum it up, the reference to bats in Leviticus 11:19, Deuteronomy 14:18 is highly uncertain. It is not a taxonomy problem, it is a translation problem. Until and unless the Hebrew word atallêph can be precisely and certainly identified, there are no solid grounds upon which to assume an error exists here. This is not proof to prove a Bible error, therefore it proves only that our knowledge of ancient Hebrew, much as it has improved since 1611, still has room to improve. You know what? Let's take a look at whether I have any modernized information. Leviticus 11:19. Let's see what it says. I've got 7 translations to look at. A lot of times, some guy will come at you like that. That's stupid because bats aren't the same as birds. I say, well, it's mistranslated. They go, no, it hasn't. The King James Version has the original Word of God. No, it isn't. See, they just go, they make a mistake to prove their point. And they know it's a mistake, and they won't listen to anything that might be relatively better in research. Let's go back and look. 11:19. Leviticus 11:19. Let's make it bigger and even bigger. Let's see what 11:19 says. In the stork, the herald, its kinds, the hoop, and the bat. Okay. So let's look at 11:19 in the Hebrew. And the bat. It says bat there. Atallêph. There's that word. Let's look in the dictionary. Now it says bat. And it's in these 3 places, like they said. Atallêph is a Hebrew noun which denotes a cloaked animal or a bat. 2 of these 3 of the 3 occurrences, atallêph occurs in the Pentateuch. And in Leviticus 11:19, it is one of the fowls which were not to be eaten, for they were an abomination. The bat is technically a mammal and not a bird. According to modern zoological classification, its young are born alive in earth. Okay, it's explaining about the bats. Okay. So all of the versions here have bat. And the bat, and the bat, and the bat, and the bat. I don't see any problem here. It's not classified with him. It's classified as something you shouldn't eat. Isaiah 2:20. In that day men will cast away to the moles and the bats their idols of silver and the idols. Well, so what? I don't. Why they're making all flying insect? Okay. Why they're making an objection to this? It's just saying don't eat that. Well, a bat doesn't have to be the same thing as a bird not to eat it. I don't understand. Anyway, that's a good answer. You just do some research. Next. We got the bats out of the way. Did Matthew refer to the wrong prophet when he wrote, "Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. They took the 30 pieces of silver coins, the price set on him by the people of Israel." All right. Matthew 27:1-10. Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people came to the decision to put Jesus to death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 silver coins to the chief priests and the elders, saying, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." But they said, "What is that to us? See to it yourselves. See to that yourselves." And he threw the pieces of silver into the sanctuary of the temple and departed, and he went away and hanged himself. The chief priests picked up the coins and saw and said, "It is against the law to put this into the treasury, since it is blood money." So they decided to use the money to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. That is why it has been called the field of blood to this day. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. They took the 30 silver coins, the price set on him by the people of Israel, and they used them to buy the potter's field as the Lord commanded me. So, that phrase, they took the 30 silver coins, the price set on him by the people of Israel, and they used them to buy the potter's field as the Lord commanded me. This part of the passage is very closely related to a passage from the prophet Zechariah. And here we go. This is what the Lord my God says to Zechariah, pasture the flock marked for slaughter, the flock of the nation Israel, who is slated for destruction due to their apostasy. Their buyers slaughter them and go unpunished. Those who sell them say, "Praise the Lord, I am rich." Their own shepherds do not spare them. Israel's rulers and leaders betray and slaughter their own. For I will no longer have pity on the people of the land, declares the Lord. I will hand everyone over to his neighbor and his king. They will oppress the land, and I will not rescue them from their hands. And then we go to the passage. So Zechariah, pastured the flock marked for slaughter, and particularly the oppressed of the flock. Then I took 2 staffs and called one favor and the other union, and I pastured the flock. And in verse 8, in 1 month I got rid of these 3 shepherds. The flock Israel detested me, and I grew weary of them. And I said, I will not be your shepherd. Let the dying die and the perishing perish. Let those who are left eat one another's flesh. Then I took my staff called favor and broke it, revoking the covenant I had made with all the nations, the northern and southern kingdom of Israel. It was revoked on that day, and so the afflicted of the flock who were watching me knew it was the word of the Lord. I told them, if you think it is best, give me my pay, but if no, keep it. So they, the leaders representing Israel, paid me, Zechariah, 30 pieces of silver. They, the people of Israel, Zechariah is saying, paid 30 pieces of silver in order to be rid of this man whom they recognized as a prophet of God, but did not want to hear and obey his message from God. So we compare these 2 passages between Matthew and Zechariah. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. They took the 30 silver coins, the price set on him by the people of Israel, and they used them to buy the potter's field as the Lord commanded me. And Zechariah says in 12:13, I told them, if you think it best, give me my pay, but if no, keep it. So they paid me 30 pieces of silver, and the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, the handsome price at which they priced me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver